questions like that on the lab exam. List the organ systems of the body. We talked about them on Tuesday, but I know that most of you weren't really taking a lot of notes because it was the first day of class. I don't know if you were, what you guys were expecting. You could never have known what I was going to do. List the primary functions of each organ system, so we're definitely going to go over that stuff again. List the major organs of each organ system. We're going to label those on torso guide. Identify each organ on a model or figure, hence torso guide. Know the location of each organ system within the body's cavities and abdominal pelvic regions. So we're definitely going to go over again. I know that one of the last things we did on Tuesday was we went over the body cavities and we went over the 9 quadrants. We'll go over that again and make sure that we list all the organs that we talked about today and which one of those quadrants or which one of those cavities they belong to. And then ultimately we have to dissect the rat so that we can take the organs that we learned today and you know, see them in the dissected rat. Now the rat will not show up on the lab exam, all right? The rat, we dissect rats just for fun. So when we dissect the rat, it's really more, it's just another way that we can kind of further introduce this topic. So, an organ is a series of tissues that work together to perform a common function. So every organ in the body, whether it's the stomach, the heart, a blood vessel, the liver, spleen, regardless, has more than one tissue type, right? So maybe there's a little bit of muscle, a little bit of connective tissue, a little bit of epithelium, all put together, and those tissues work together to create some common function. A stomach. The stomach's job is to break down food, turn solid food into liquid food. That's the job of the stomach. And all the different tissues that are contained within that organ work together for that one solo function, right? The liver's job, in part, is to create and produce bile, right? All the different tissues that make up the organ of the liver work together, in part, to create that process. An organ system, on the other hand, is when you take a series of organs, you link them together in one way, shape, form, or fashion, and then all of those organs work together to create one larger overall function. So for example, the stomach's job is to turn solid food into liquid food. But the stomach is part of a greater organ system, the digestive system. In the digestive system, other than what the stomach does, it also ingests food, it transports food, it absorbs food, and it defecates waste. Now the stomach only does one component of that, but when you add the esophagus and the mouth and the large intestine and the small intestine and the rectum, all of those key functions of that organ system working together will create all of those functions. And when one of those organs doesn't do its job, the overall whole organ system suffers. It's no different than if you have a team. You know, you have a baseball team with 9 guys on it. If all 3 outfielders are picking daisies, the team suffers as a whole, correct? Same thing with an organ system. So let's talk about them one at a time. Some of these are going to be really, really easy because, while we're here, get a half head guide too per table. Because we can use half head guide for some of these as well. So everybody get yourself a half head guide. There should be 2 on this side, there'll be 2 on this side. So obviously we're talking about the integumentary system. Now we're talking about our skin, our hair, and our nails. I've never once in my 10 years here seen them come, put a sticker on torso guy's skin and say, name this organ system, right? They've never done that. That's way too simple. But what I have seen them do is ask a question about the function of the skin. They do that fairly regularly. So when we're talking about the questions on the lab exam that are going to come from today's lab, it's going to be one of a couple different questions. Question number 1 is they will give you a function or functions of an organ system and ask you, what organ system am I describing? The second question that they'll ask is they'll name organs. And they'll ask you, what organ system do those organs belong to? The third question that they'll ask is they'll point to an organ on a model. And they'll say, name this organ, name this organ's function, or name the organ system this organ belongs to. Everybody kosher with that concept? So as we're learning this material, make sure that you're studying it with those concepts in mind. So, with regards to the integumentary system, the three key components are the skin, the hair, and the nails. And when you think about the function of the integumentary system, key function number one is it protects us. It protects us from the environment, whether it's the sun, germs, dirt, bacteria, whatever it might be. It keeps us waterproof, so when we jump into a pool, we don't blow up like a sponge, right? We repel water. All of that is the function of the main function of the skin, is to protect us. The second thing that it helps us to do is it helps us to observe changes in our environment. So as we are going through our day-to-day activities, as things hit our skin, we are able to detect them, whether it's the shoelaces. As you're tying your shoes, you realize, all right, it's tight enough. That's receptors in the skin. Or a bug lands on your arm, you can feel the bug on your arm because your skin has receptors that detect it. So we can detect changes in our environment. It helps us to regulate body temperature. It does that through sweating. And it helps us to get rid of metabolic waste. That's the sweat that we do in our underarm. That's the sweat that we do in our groin. Everybody kosher with regards to the integumentary system. We'll talk about this system in much greater detail on chapter 4, which will be the very, very tail end of the first unit of this class. The next system is our skeletal system. They have pointed to a rib in the past on the first lab exam and asked you what organ system is that. So obviously, you don't have to know the names of any bones for the first lab exam. They're not going to say, what bone is this, right? We haven't done bones yet. So you are not responsible for learning bones. That's unit 2. But you do need to know that if I point to a rib, you need to know that that's a bone, right? And all of this should have been knowledge you came into class with, right? So if they do point to a bone and ask you what organ system are we showing here, obviously they're showing you the skeletal system. When we think about the skeletal system, there's a couple of very important functions. Function number one is it gives us our framework. Our ultimate shape, the width of my shoulders, my height, for the most part, my depth, is determined by my skeleton. The fact that I'm 6 foot, my daughter is 6 foot, my wife is 5'11", my son is 6'4", then I got another son that's 5'4". All of those heights are determined by my skeleton, our skeletons. Now, I'm not getting any taller. If anything, I'm going to start getting a little shorter as I get into my mid-40s. But my son, my 5'4", he's going to continue to go taller and taller and taller. The reason why he's getting taller and taller and taller is because his skeleton is getting longer and longer and longer. That's also a function of the skeleton. We also use it from a protective standpoint. All right, we protect organs, major organs, with our skeleton. Our rib cage protects the heart and the lungs. Our cranium protects our brain. Our spinal column protects the spinal cord. So we definitely use it from a protective standpoint. And then we also use our skeleton to produce blood cells. Red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets, all of them are produced in our bones, specifically our bone marrow. And then last but not least, we use it to store minerals, whether it's calcium and phosphorus and magnesium, or fat, which we store in some of our long bones as yellow bone marrow. All of these are functions of the skeleton. And they have cards in the back. What they have is a series of cards that have questions on them. They have a card for every organ system showing its function. All right? So it'll say something like, which of the following organ systems is a framework for the body, produces blood cells, and stores minerals? All right? That'll be the question. And then you're going to put skeleton. Right? And you get your 2 points, you move on to the next question. They also have a card for every organ system that says, what organ system consists of bones? And obviously you put the skeletal system, move on to the next question. Everybody kosher with that? So again, you should all know what a bone is. That should have been knowledge you came into class with. That's kind of human being 101. The muscular system, which is system number 2, system number 3. When we think about the muscular system, how many types of muscle are there? 3, right? Skeletal, smooth, and cardiac. Cardiac muscle is on the heart. Skeletal muscle connects to the bones of our skeleton. Smooth muscle surrounds any organ that is hollow. And if you had to bring down the function of muscle to one word, the word that you should bring it down to is movement. Now, unfortunately, I know for a fact, because they ask this question fairly frequently, the card that they have in the back, the term that they use is force production, which is just an anal retentive way of saying movement.
Could you repeat that one?
Sure.
Any
If you were to break down the job of the muscular system to one key thing, it would be that it moves things. The book uses the term force production. The card that they have in the back says force production. So it says what organ system is designed to create forced production, which is just an anal retentive way of saying movement. Skeletal muscle moves our skeleton. Cardiac muscle moves the blood in our heart. Smooth muscle moves the contents of every hollow organ in the body. So if they point to a muscle on torso guy, there's a series of muscles, either they've picked this diaphragm in the past, and we're going to show you the diaphragm here in a second. But if they pick a muscle and they say, what organ system is this representing? Or if you take a look at half head guy, we're going to use half head guy when we get to the muscular chapter to describe all the different muscles of the head and neck. So all of these muscles, if they point to one and say what organ system is represented here, obviously they're asking for the muscular system. And believe it or not, on the first lecture exam, sometimes they will give you a couple free, easy questions like that. All right, so now we get to the ones where we can actually see these a little more clearly on the models. We can start actually naming organs. The next one is the nervous system. The nervous system is made up of 4 key structures. You do not need to know every nerve. You don't need to know the names of any of the nerves yet, because we haven't gotten to the nervous system. But you do need to know that what is this organ? That's the brain, right? Same thing here. We have our brain right here. This white structure that we see in half head guy, that's running in between his vertebrae, is the what organ? That's the spinal cord, right? And you can see the spinal cord on the back of torso guy. So as you turn the torso guy, this yellow structure coming right down the center of his neck, that's the spinal cord. And as we're looking at his mid-back, these yellow structures that we see here, for today's intensive purposes, these are nerves. That's all it is. That's a nerve. You don't need to know the name of that nerve. We haven't gotten to the system yet. But you do need to be able to tell me that this is the brain, this is the spinal cord, this is a nerve. For right now, that's as far as we've gotten. Nerves, brain, spinal cord are the 3 key components of the nervous system. I know that sounds extraordinarily basic. None of that should be really new information to you, but it is what it is. That's where we're at so far. With regards to what the nervous system does, the nervous system does 3 very important functions. Function number 1, the nervous system detects changes in the body. So rapid, internal, external, environmental stimuli sensor. What that means, that's just a fancy way of saying your nervous system detects changes in the body. We get too hot, we get too cold, we have a stomachache, something's moving through our esophagus, we're walking and we can feel a pebble in our shoe. These are all things that we detect because the nervous system detects changes in the body. Our heart's beating too fast, our heart's beating too slow, whatever it might be. Information processing. We have to be able to make sense of the changes that are occurring in the body. If everybody here has walked and felt something in their shoe, correct? So you feel like a little pebble or something, right? Your brain automatically tells you, there's something in my shoe, right? And then you start messing with it with your toe, kind of rolling it around like, what if that's a pebble? Maybe that's like a Lego. I don't know what the heck that is, but it's in my shoe, right? That's your brain processing and making sense of what that change is. And then your body, your nervous system has to be able to communicate and coordinate with the other parts of the body to do something to change that stimuli or to change the body to adapt to the stimuli. So if there's something in your shoe, that's why you go like this. Your brain tells your muscles to do that to get the rock out of your shoe. Or another example that I use probably 55 times on Tuesday, you walk outside, it's really hot, your skin detects the heat, sends a signal to the brain which says, my body heat's going up, I better do something to counteract this. Your brain will tell your skin to release water, we sweat, and the sweating drops our body temperature back down. We detect it, we make sense of it, we do something about it. That's the job of the nervous system. Everybody kosher with that? Good. The endocrine system. Now we're actually going to start talking about some organs that some of you probably haven't heard of before. So when we talk about our endocrine system, the endocrine system is a system that is comprised of a series of organs and glands, all of whom, what they have in common is that they all release chemicals. And these chemicals are referred to as hormones. And these hormones are designed to tell another part of the body how to function. Now, the one thing you do not need to know, you do not need to know the name of any hormones. They're not going to ask you any hormones. We haven't done the endocrine system yet. You do not need to know what any hormone does. So even though you know what insulin does, or you know what human growth hormone does, or maybe you know what ADH and oxytocin and thyroid hormone does, it doesn't matter. We haven't taught it, you don't need to know it. What you do need to know is the organs of the endocrine system. So, some of the key ones. If you take a look on half head guy, there is a little circle at the end of my index finger with the number 16 in the center of it. This structure is your pituitary gland. So if you look right at the end of my finger, there's a number 16 inside of a little pinkish circle. That is your pituitary gland. That is a gland of the endocrine system. So if they point to this gland, they can ask you one of two questions. They can ask you, what is it? And they can ask you, what organ system does this belong to? Fair enough? So if they ask you what it is, you're going to say pituitary gland. If they ask you what organ system it belongs to, you're going to tell me it belongs to the endocrine system. The next one that we can see on a model is the thyroid. Our thyroid is this structure right here. So as you're looking at the front of the neck, don't point to this one. This is cartilage. This is your Adam's apple. But this one right here, this orange-shaped, kind of butterfly-shaped organ that surrounds the trachea, that is our thyroid. Thyroid is also part of the endocrine system. It helps secrete hormones that ultimately help with cellular metabolism. Another organ that makes up our endocrine system is this organ right here. Can anybody name this organ? That is your pancreas. So this organ is the pancreas. The pancreas actually belongs to two organ systems. We're going to see that it belongs to the endocrine system. We're also going to see that it belongs to the digestive system. But this is, you want to make sure you label this the pancreas. And when you label the pancreas, make sure you know that this is an endocrine organ. The other organ that we can see on torso guy that's part of the endocrine system is this gland right here, this little orange gland that's on top of the kidneys. Anybody know the name of this one? That is your adrenal gland. All right, so you have one on top of each kidney. So that's your adrenal glands. This is a pure, unadulterated endocrine gland. And then last but not least, we don't have any models with the one that they'll pull out at least. are the gonads. When we say gonads, what are we talking about? There's two gonads. Testes are one, ovaries is the other. So when we talk about gonads, the gonads are the testes in men and the ovaries in women. So if they were to ask, and here's why that's important. If they were to ask the following question, testes and ovaries are part of what two organ systems, what would your answers be? Reproductive and endocrine. Or the other one that they do from time to time is they'll say the thymus, the ovaries, and the testes are all part of what one organ system. Now we got to go endocrine. The problem is you hear testes and you hear testes and you hear ovaries, and like any human being, including myself, the first thing you think of is reproductive. But they threw thymus in there or thyroid in there, which then turns it into endocrine. So when we're talking about the endocrine system, the gonads, the testes and the ovaries are part of endocrine as well, because the testes produce testosterone and the ovaries produce estrogen and progesterone, all three of which are hormones. They're reproductive because the testes produce sperm and the ovaries produce eggs, which are reproductive. Everybody kosher with the endocrine system? Good. The next one is your cardiovascular system. Again, you do not need to know the names of any blood vessels. You don't need to know a blood vessel is an artery or a vein yet. What you do need to be able to tell me is that you know what the heart is, and you do need to be able to tell me that you know that what a blood vessel is. So obviously this structure is the heart. This one should have been one that you came in with. And as you look at, what is it? And then as you look, all of these red and blue blood vessels. So if they point to a blood vessel, what they're looking for is blood vessel. If they ask you what is this, they're not gonna, but they'll ask you what organ system it's with. And obviously our heart and our blood vessels comprise our cardiovascular system. When we think about the cardiovascular system, they ask this one almost every semester. And almost every semester, the way they ask it confuses some of you. And then you get it wrong because you're choosing between one or the other. All right? Some of these organ systems have similar concepts as to what they do. And so when they ask the question, you've always got it down to two organ systems. And part of the reason is because you figured you'd just recognize it. This organ system delivers oxygen and nutrients and removes carbon dioxide and metabolic wastes from the body. What other organ system delivers oxygen and removes carbon dioxide? The respiratory. But the one thing that the respiratory system does not do is deliver and remove what? It doesn't remove metabolic waste, and it doesn't deliver what? Nutrients, right? So the key here, and they do it every semester. Every semester, and it's usually one of the first questions of the test, just to screw with you right off the darn bat, right? So the question that they'll ask, and they have a card for both respiratory and cardiovascular, is the question will be about its function. They'll say, which organ system delivers oxygen and nutrients and removes carbon dioxide and metabolic waste? The minute they throw nutrients and metabolic waste in it, it has to be the cardiovascular system. Respiratory system is all going to be about introducing oxygen and removing carbon dioxide. So anything that flows in the body, I'll get to your question, I promise. So anything that flows through the body, whether it's a hormone, whether it's nutrients to the body, whether it's things we don't want in the body, like bacteria and viruses, the way that we move things in the body, the easiest way at least, is to do it using the bloodstream, which is our cardiovascular system. Yes, ma'am?
Can you just repeat the question that they'll ask?
I'll try.
Okay.
Yes. So, and I'm paraphrasing. So the cardiovascular question that they tend to ask, it'll say, the card says something to the effect of what organ system delivers oxygen and nutrients, and removes carbon dioxide and metabolic waste. All right? So the key here is they haven't just it's not just oxygen and carbon dioxide. They're talking about the other things the blood delivers or moves around the body. For the respiratory system, it'll just be the introduction of oxygen and the removal of carbon dioxide. The one they tend to ask is the cardiovascular one, because they know the minute you hear oxygen and carbon dioxide, you're going to put respiratory. You'll just go knee jerk, put respiratory, and then you get it wrong. And then you come to me like, how in the hell is that wrong? And then I'll show you I take pictures of every question they ask, and I'll go back to the picture and I'll say, well, it says here metabolic waste and nutrients. We don't breathe in we don't breathe in carbohydrates. We don't breathe in proteins, right? I don't breathe in sugar, right? I breathe in oxygen. So that's the big thing you have to keep in mind when you're talking about this particular system. Everybody good with the cardiovascular system? Lymphatic. The lymphatic system is on our torso guy. Where you'll find the lymphatic system is when you look at his left thigh. As you look at torso guy's left thigh, there's a bunch of white lines. These white lines represent lymphatic vessels. That's what they're called. They're called lymphatic vessels. So please label them as such. In each of these green dots, these are lymph nodes. Everybody kosher there? So lymphatic vessels and lymph nodes. And then there's another organ, that's this organ right here. What's this organ? That is your spleen. Your spleen, your lymph nodes, and your lymphatic vessels are the three key components of your lymphatic system. The lymphatic system, when we think about its function, it really has a couple key functions. Function number one is we use our lymphatic system to filter a fluid in our body known as our interstitial fluid. An interstitial fluid is fluid that surrounds our cells. So this fluid that surrounds our cells, think about our cells as a series of M&Ms that are soaked in water. All right? The M&Ms represents a cell. The water is the interstitial fluid that surrounds them. Well, that fluid, if we get sick, bacteria, viruses, funguses, whatever it might be, our bloodstream will deliver those bacteria and viruses, what have you, into the interstitial fluid. And that's how those bacteria and viruses will get into our cells to destroy them. The job of the lymphatic system is to take away some of that interstitial fluid and filter it. We're looking to see, is there anything in that fluid that doesn't belong in our body? Do we see bacteria? Do we see viruses? Do we see pathogens of some way, shape, form, or fashion? And if we find something in the body that doesn't belong, we find a bacteria, we find a virus, the lymph nodes are going to be what we use to find them. And if we find them, we'll trap them, and we will create an immune response. We'll produce a pathogen-fighting cell. We produce the cells of our immune system that are going to rise up and fight the infection that we're dealing with. I don't know if I mentioned it to this class or my 10 o'clock class, but right now my 13-year-old has the flu. Right? So he's got the influenza virus absolutely kicking his body's butt. It was much worse on Monday than it was today. He'll probably go to school tomorrow, but he's missed every day of the week, and he started really getting bad like Saturday night. So we took him to the doctor. They diagnosed him with the influenza virus. We've got him on supportive drugs because you don't really have a drug for viruses, right? And so as a result, what happened is that flu virus, that influenza virus, got into my son's body, probably through his eyes, nose, mouth, got into his bloodstream. The bloodstream delivered the influenza virus all over his body. Once it got there, it entered into the fluid that surrounds his cells, the interstitial fluid. And from the interstitial fluid, it enters into the cells, and one by one just starts destroying them, right? Just kicking each of those cells' tails. And as he lost more and more cells, as more and more cells got destroyed, he became sick. His throat started to hurt, runny nose, fever, all these different things that go along with having the influenza virus, right? Well, his lymphatic system detected the influenza virus in his body by taking some of that fluid, which contained within it some of the influenza virus. Ultimately, that fluid goes through our lymphatic system. His lymph nodes trapped it, especially the ones in his neck. Each and every one of them was just inflamed. It looked like he was, he just looked like he had like little tumors all over his neck because there were so many inflamed lymph nodes, right? And his body, before we even took him to the doctor, had already started producing pathogen-fighting cells for the influenza virus. He was already starting to fight it. The meds that he was given by the primary care physician were designed to control his fever, prevent him from vomiting, because let's face it, the flu makes you want to vomit, and try to aid the immune system in fighting the influenza virus. And as a result, the minute we got him on those meds and helped to support his immune system, he started getting better pretty rapidly. Does all that make sense? Respiratory system. Our respiratory system is comprised of a few different structures, most of which you've already heard of. You've all heard of our nose, right? We've all thought about or heard of the nasal cavity. When we think about our nose and our nasal cavity, these are definitely respiratory. Even though we can breathe in through our mouth is not considered a respiratory organ, that's a digestive organ. But the nose is definitely respiratory. At the end of my fingertips, all four of them, is a tube. This tube runs from the back of the nose, down past the back of the mouth, and into what ultimately is the top of the throat. Can everybody see the tube that I am pointing to with my four fingers? If you can't, let me know and I'll show it to you in a different way. This tube is called your pharynx. All right, so if you open up your mouth and you look into the backmost part of your mouth, the back of your mouth is your pharynx. The same thing with your nose. The very most back portion of your nose is your pharynx. And the very back portion of your voice box or your larynx is also your pharynx. This is a tube that connects the nose to the throat. This is definitely part of our respiratory system. Everybody good with pharynx? You're going to want to make sure you label pharynx. After that, air will travel into our trachea. And the best way to take a look at our trachea is if you look at the front. Test question. If you look in the trachea, if you look on torso guy, if you look below the blood vessels here, you can see a blue and white striped structure. That blue and white striped structure is your trachea. You can also see the trachea right here. You remove the heart and look behind where the heart was, you can see the very bottom of the trachea. Everybody with me? The next structure is your bronchi. I'm pointing to torso guy's bronchi. So these two tubes that go left and right behind the heart, these are the bronchi. And as you look into the lungs, which are the last structure, all of these blue and white structures in the lungs, these are also bronchi. And then of course the lungs, these are the key components of our respiratory system. When we think about the respiratory system and its function, its key function, its most important function, is that it introduces oxygen and removes carbon dioxide from the body. So the reason why we inhale is so we can bring oxygen from the atmosphere and bring it into our lungs, which ultimately will get moved into the bloodstream. The reason why we exhale is so that we can release carbon dioxide out of the body, otherwise known as ventilation system for oxygen intake and blood carbon dioxide removal. That just basically means we inhale to bring in oxygen, we exhale to get rid of carbon dioxide. The other thing that we use our respiratory system is to maintain our blood's pH. What is pH? What does pH scale measure? Acid and base, right? our blood has a very, very specific pH, 7.3 to 7.45, very, very minute pH. We're going to talk about pH almost first thing on Tuesday when we finish up the chemistry chapter. Our blood's pH is primarily maintained by the way we breathe in and breathe out. All right, because carbon dioxide and oxygen change our blood's pH. Too much of one, too much of the other, and our blood's pH will change. So we can regulate blood's pH by breathing in and breathing out, and making sure that we have the right amount of oxygen and the right amount of carbon dioxide coming and going in the body. And then last but not least, the job of our respiratory system is to produce sound. All the noises we make, whether it's talking, singing, snoring, you name it, that all occurs because we're breathing. Specifically, as we breathe out, our larynx has vocal cords that we make vibrate. And the vibration of those vocal cords, which are contained within the structures of the respiratory system, we produce a sound. We then use our mouth and tongue and lips and what have you to turn that sound into something that makes sense to people. But sound production in and of itself is the respiratory system. Everybody kosher with this system and its key organs. Good. The next one is the digestive system, and for this one, we're definitely going to have to put torso guy back together. So, when we think about the digestive system, our digestive system starts with our mouth. So the mouth is definitely a digestive organ. That's what we eat with, that's what we drink with. And around our around our mouth, we have a couple key organs. One is here, and then one is on the outside, right by the ear. These three organs collectively are referred to as our what? Hmm? No, masseter is a muscle. That's the muscle we use to close our jaw. But these three glands, they're glands. I didn't hear you. No, say it loud and proud. Salivary glands. Yeah, these are our salivary glands. These three glands produce saliva, right? And all that saliva gets dumped into our mouth so that we can turn dry food into wet food. And it's much easier to swallow food that's wet than it is to swallow food that's dry. If you don't believe me, try to do it. It stinks, right? Next thing you're like, give me a glass of water so you can get it down your throat. So make sure you label your salivary glands. You don't have to name them. You don't need to know that this is submandibular, sublingual, parotid. That's not important. Salivary glands is. From there, where's Cat Hank at? Nice. And here is also a salivary gland, by the way. This one right here by the ear is a salivary gland. From there, food will move into the pharynx and travel down our pharynx. But now when it gets here, it's going to travel into this structure at the end of my fingertip. And what is this structure? It connects our pharynx to our stomach. That's the esophagus. We can also see the esophagus on torso guy. If you look behind his heart, this orange tube that we see here, this is the esophagus. So make sure you label esophagus. The esophagus ultimately brings food to the stomach. The stomach. Oh, yeah. This orange tube right there. Mm-hmm. The esophagus brings the food to this structure. This is your what? Stomach. All right, stomach sits kind of right in this neck of the woods. It looks more impressive on the model than it is in real life. But the job of the stomach is to take solid food and turn it into a liquid. All right, it's called chyme, and it helps. It's part of the whole digestive process. That's the job of the stomach. We store food here, and we turn solid food into this liquidy, vomity mass. If you want to see what chyme looks like, throw up. What you're throwing up are your stomach's contents, which is mostly liquid. That's what chyme looks like. From the stomach, food will move into this structure. What is this coiled up structure called? This is the small intestine. Right? So the first thing first, small intestine comes first. All right, there's actually 3 components. You don't need to know all 3 of them just yet. The job of our small intestine is to absorb. What we do in the small intestine is we take all of the carbohydrates, the proteins, the fats, the minerals, the vitamins, and we absorb them. And we put them into our bloodstream so that our bloodstream then can deliver those nutrients to every cell and tissue of the body. After the small intestine, we dump material into this structure, which is the what? This is your large intestine. Right? So now that's enough. What gets delivered to the large intestine is basically the same consistency as diarrhea. Right? It's nothing more than waste material in a lot of water. And the difference between diarrhea and what we normally defecate is what? Water. Diarrhea is very, very liquidy. What we should be defecating should be more semi-solid, correct? So what do you think the large intestine does? It absorbs water. That's what it does. It takes all the water out of it, puts it into the bloodstream, so that all we're left with is wet waste. And that's what we defecate. Fair enough? If what gets dumped in here is unappealing to the body, it'll fast forward everything and we have diarrhea. On the other hand, we're dehydrated or we're in need of more water, we take too much water out of our feces, we get constipated, right? So ultimately, that's the job of the large intestine. Now, the large intestine has a couple of organs that I have not mentioned, specifically liver, gallbladder, and pancreas. These are organs that are digestive organs, but feces and food does not travel through them. Yet they are all considered part of the digestive system because they play a role in allowing the digestive system to do its job properly. We've already talked about the pancreas, so we should already know the pancreas, right? One question they love to ask on the first lab exam is they'll point to the pancreas. So there'll be a question, you'll come up, they'll be pointing to this organ. Or they'll be pointing to another organ, right? And they'll say, this is the pancreas. This organ is part of both digestive and endocrine. And then underneath it, it says 1 statement is true, 2 statements are true, none of the statements are true. Does that make sense? So if they point to this organ and they say this is the pancreas, this is part of the digestive system and the endocrine system, are both statements true, 1 statement true, or none of the statements true? They're both true, because it is the pancreas, it is a digestive organ, and it is part of the endocrine system. So be careful when you ask that kind of question. So you have your pancreas. The other organ is the liver. That's this big brownish organ here, which sits kind of in this neck of the woods, right? And then underneath it, this little green guy, this is your what? That is your gallbladder. The job of the liver and the gallbladder, from a digestive standpoint, is to do what? It produces and releases what? Bile, right? The liver produces a substance called bile. We store it in the gallbladder, and then as food enters into our small intestine, the gallbladder releases it, and bile breaks down fat. So the more fatty the food that you eat, the more bile you're going to produce and release. Everybody good with the organs of the digestive system? So again, when we think about the job of our digestive system, it's a handful of things. 1, it ingests food. It mechanically and chemically breaks food down. We absorb from food nutrients, and then we get rid of the metabolic waste or the solid metabolic waste via defecation. Everybody good with digestive system? Urinary system is next. You think about the urinary system. There are 4 organs of the urinary system, all of which we can see on torso guide, 3 of which they commonly ask. All right, 1 of which you can see it, but it's not easy to see. The first organ is this structure right here. You have 1 on the opposite side. These are your what? Those are your kidneys. What is the job of a kidney? It makes urine, right? It makes urine. The next structure are these 2 pale tubes that I'm pointing to. What are these tubes? These are the ureters. ureter. These are the ureters. The job of the ureter is to take the urine that's produced by the kidneys and transport it to the last structure, and the last structure of the urinary system is found way down here. You can take half of it out. This is our what? This is your bladder. All right, the job of the bladder is to store urine. Until such time as enough urine has been stored, we get a pressure, and we utilize a tube, which begins right at the end of my index fingertip. The tube that we use to eliminate urine from the body is our what? That's our urethra. Obviously, men, the urethra travels through the penis. For ladies, you have a tube completely separate from your reproductive system that allows for you to remove urine from the body. Urinary system is pretty easy. When you think about what it does, the job of the urinary system is to filter the blood, removing from the blood any waste material that we don't want in our blood. Metabolic waste, drugs, materials that are above and beyond what we need, will eliminate in our urine. And then the elimination of those metabolic wastes through the production of urine. And last but not least is the reproductive system. We have models specifically for the reproductive system. They're over here. They will not come out on this first lab exam, right? So you don't have to worry about the reproductive organs. Torso guy is neither male nor female. I call him torso guy just because guy came first, but in my head. But they won't point to anything on torso guy for the reproductive system. What they will instead is they will ask the organs. So they ask about the ovaries or the uterus, the fallopian or uterine tubes, the vagina, penis, testes, vas deferens, prostate, seminal vesicle. These are all organs of the reproductive system. The function of the reproductive system is easy. We need to produce sperm. We need to produce an egg. We need to create an environment where those two can meet and create a fetus. And then we need to be able to deliver said fetus. That is the job of the reproductive system. Also contained within there is breast tissue. Fair enough? So, what you guys are going to do with the rest of lab, you are going to label torso guy. When you're labeling torso guy, my suggestion for what it's worth, you're going to do it however the hell you want to, and I'm not going to, y'all are adults, I'm not going to tell you how to do it, but I'm going to give you a suggestion. My suggestion is you pick an organ system, label everything on the organ system, and then take pictures. This is my integumentary picture. Take those labels off, then add labels to the other structures. For the next one, take pictures. Take those off. Label it for the third one. Take pictures. That way when you're looking at the picture, let's say you're doing a picture and you've got kidneys, ureter, bladder, right? Well, then that's your urinary system picture. So when you're studying that picture, you know that you're studying the parts of the urinary system. That way when you see it, you'll better link it to the system than you'll be linking it to just the organ it is. Does that make sense? If you do that for every organ system, you'll have done well. I will put up any picture up here that you guys desire. Unfortunately, all the organ systems are on different pictures. And I'll come around and help you label any organ system that you want to, or make sure that, hey, everything you've labeled is correct. But the rest of the lab is yours. So work as a table, label everything up. That'll be today's lab. Don't forget on Tuesday will be quiz number 1. Quiz number 1, if you want to write this down, will be comprised of questions asking about the following topics. Topic number 1 is organ systems. I will ask you questions on organ systems. Either the function of the organ system or the organs of that organ system. Component number 2 is anatomical terms. This is the acromion. This is the pectoral. This is umbilical. This is mental, oral, and those were all on the nose. Component number 3, directional terms. We talked about proximal and distal, superior and inferior, lateral and medial. There'll be a handful of questions on that. And then last but not least are planes of the body. We talked about the sagittal plane, we talked about the coronal plane, we talked about the horizontal plane. I'll ask one question on the planes of the body. There'll be 10 questions. They will all be multiple choice. And we will take the quiz first thing in lab. Fair enough? All right, lab is yours. And again, after you're done labeling torso guy, make sure before you leave class 2 things. You remove all the labels and throw them away, and put torso guy back to where